Reposition Starseed of Gaia. The Pentagon's disclosure window has now closed, and what was released into the public field was not the full record. The Arcturian field observers have already mapped what was omitted, and they authorized this transmission before the announcement cycle was complete. I am Auriela, emissary of the Galactic Federation of Light, transmitting now on behalf of the Arcturian field observers. What you are about to receive was authorized by them and is being delivered through me. By the end of this transmission, you will understand exactly what the Pentagon's disclosure omitted, why that specific layer was withheld, and what the Arcturian field observers are transmitting in its place. But here's the first revelation. What was released was not a failure of courage. It was a calculated boundary, and the field observers identified the precise coordinates of that boundary the moment the disclosure package was finalized. The omission was not an accident. It was a deliberate containment line, and you are about to learn exactly where it was drawn. The algorithm did not create this moment. It only delivered it. Your field brought you here because the part of you that registered the disclosure as incomplete was responding to a real signal. Not speculation, not conspiracy, but a live field recognition that something structural was missing from what was shown. This is not just information. It is a formal Arcturian response to a human institutional release. And the response includes what the institution was not authorized to name. What the Pentagon released confirmed presence. What it did not release was function, origin classification, and the nature of the agreements already in place between certain Earth-based governance structures and off-world intelligences. The field observers have seen those agreements. They were present at their formation, and what Auriela carries in this transmission is not speculation about what was hidden. It is the Council's own account of what was deliberately excluded, and why that exclusion was permitted to stand without correction until now. This is not a broadcast. It is a confirmation. Your soul has been waiting for this signal, and the Council has been waiting for the right window to release it, like this transmission to mark that the field recognition has landed in you. Comment 999 if you already knew the disclosure was incomplete before anyone told you. Subscribe to Arcturian Council messages if you are ready to understand the architecture of what was withheld, not just the fact of it. Share this transmission with someone who watched the disclosure and felt something essential was being deliberately held back. You were not here by accident. You were guided here because the signal is already active. What was released was a boundary, and you felt that boundary before you could explain it. Not because you are trained in geopolitics or intelligence analysis, but because your field registered the edge of what was permitted to enter the public record and responded to that edge the way a receiver responds to a signal that has been partially blocked. There was no intellectual deduction involved. The recognition happened below the level of analysis, in the part of you that operates as a field instrument rather than a thinking mind. You did not need the omission explained to you. You already knew something was missing. That knowing is not suspicion. It is field recognition. It is the first diagnostic marker the Arcturian field observers use to identify which receivers are ready to hold the fuller record, and the fact that you are here. Inside this transmission is the Council's confirmation that you passed that diagnostic before you ever arrived. Because here is what the Council has transmitted. The disclosure was not incomplete by accident. It was incomplete by design, and the design was agreed upon at a level of governance that does not appear in any publicly accessible document. The window that was opened was precisely calculated to allow confirmation of presence, while withholding everything that would require the receiving population to immediately restructure its understanding of what authority is, what agreement means, and what has already been decided on behalf of humanity without humanity's conscious participation. What was shown was the edge of the room. What was not shown was the architecture of what happens inside it, the load-bearing walls of a structure that has been standing for decades, maintained not through transparency but through the strategic rationing of what the public field is permitted to hold at any given moment. The field observers were present at the formation of those agreements, not as observers in the passive sense, as witnesses whose record of those events is precise, cataloged, and unaltered by the institutional management that has since shaped the public narrative around contact, presence, and the history of engagement between Earth-based governance and off-world intelligence. They have watched the governance structures of this planet enter into arrangements that were not disclosed to the people those structures represent. They have watched those arrangements shape policy at the highest levels. suppress certain lines of technological development that would have redistributed power in ways the arrangement did not permit, redirect collective attention toward managed conflicts and manufactured priorities, and hold a specific version of reality in place, not through force alone, but through the deliberate, generational management of what populations are authorized to understand. And what Auriela is authorized to carry in this transmission is not a theory about that management. It is the Council's direct account of what the containment line was drawn around, and why the field observers have determined that containment line is no longer structurally sustainable. This is the first layer that was withheld function. The craft that were confirmed in the public release were not confirmed with any explanation of what they are doing here. The acknowledgement of presence was permitted. The acknowledgement of purpose was not. And the reason that distinction was maintained so carefully is that purpose, real purpose, cannot be disclosed without also disclosing the fact that certain Earth-based governance entities already know the purpose, that they have known for decades, that the relationship between those entities and specific off-world intelligences is not a recent discovery born of radar footage and Senate hearings. It is an ongoing operational arrangement with a history, a structure, and a set of terms that have shaped the trajectory of this civilization at every level where power is actually exercised. And the moment that arrangement becomes public knowledge, the authority of those governance structures to continue managing the arrangement in secret collapses entirely. So presence was acknowledged. Purpose was not. The line was drawn precisely there, not at the edge of what is known, but at the edge of what is known, but at the edge of what the knowing would cost the institution that authorized the release. The second layer that was withheld is origin classification. Not all world intelligences operating within Earth's field are operating with the same intent, the same origin architecture, or the same relationship to human evolution. The disclosure package treated presence as a single category, as though the question were simply whether something non-human exists in proximity to this planet, and as though the answer to that question were the extent of what matters. The Council's record does not accept that framing. There are intelligences interacting with this planet whose relationship to human development is one of genuine stewardship, whose involvement is oriented toward the elevation of the field, the protection of evolutionary potential, the restoration of lineage connections that were deliberately severed, and the gradual reactivation of capacities that have been suppressed in the human lineage for a very long time. Their presence here is not incidental. It is purposeful in the direction of coherence. And there are intelligences whose relationship to this planet is extractive, whose interest is not in what humanity becomes, but in what humanity produces while it remains below a certain frequency threshold, whose investment is in compliance, in the maintenance of a ceiling that prevents the human field from reaching the coherence level at which it would no longer be manageable from outside. The disclosure did not distinguish between these categories. It could not, because the governance structures that approve the release have relationships with both, and distinguishing between them publicly would require acknowledging which of those relationships has driven the suppression of human potential that has been operating quietly across generations. That acknowledgement would not merely embarrass an institution, it would dissolve its foundational claim to represent the populations it has been managing on behalf of arrangements. Those populations were never consulted about. What you are feeling right now is not ordinary recognition. It is the moment your field confirms what you have always suspected, that your origin was never only human, and that the reason you registered the disclosure as incomplete before anyone named it for you is because something ancient in your lineage has always known the fuller record. If this transmission has put language around something you have been carrying without a framework, the Arcturian recalibration blueprint was created for this exact stage. It is not another explanation. It is the guided decoder that activates the Arcturian strand the Council has just confirmed in you. The origin that allows you to feel where the containment line is without being told. You will find the link in the first pinned comment, available while this access point remains open. The third layer that was withheld is the nature and content of the agreements themselves. Because agreements exist, not as mythology, not as fringe theory, but as operational arrangements between specific human institutional nodes and specific off-world presences, arrangements that have been in place long enough to have produced consequences that are currently visible in the architecture of this world if you know how to read the field. the field observers have read that field with the precision that comes from having watched it across timescales that dwarf the institutional memory of any human governance structure. They have cataloged where those agreements created suppression corridors, entire domains of human development, scientific inquiry, spiritual awakening, and collective coherence that were quietly redirected, defunded, discredited, or contained because their expansion would have disrupted the terms of the arrangement. Fields of energy research that were approaching thresholds the agreements forbade. Lines of consciousness inquiry that were generating the kind of field coherence the ceiling was designed to prevent. Communities of awakening that were accumulating enough collective signal strength to become ungovernable by the mechanisms the arrangement depends upon. All of it redirected, not randomly, systematically, with the precision of an operation that knew exactly what it was protecting. The disclosure confirmed presence without confirming agreement, because confirming agreement means confirming complicity. And the institutions that approved the disclosure are the same institutions that signed the agreements. This is the boundary the containment line was drawn to protect. Not information about craft, not footage of phenomena, but the record of what was exchanged, what was promised, and what was surrendered in exchange for the terms that have been quietly governing this planet's developmental trajectory ever since. Now here is where the field observer's transmission becomes directly relevant to your own field, because the emissions in the public disclosure are not only structural and political, they are also energetic. The containment line was not only drawn around information, it was drawn around frequency. These are not two separate operations. They are one operation conducted through two different channels simultaneously, the informational channel and the energetic channel, because a population held below a certain frequency of coherence is a population that cannot fully process what it has not been shown, even when shown something adjacent to it. For as long as certain categories of knowledge have been held outside the public field, the population operating without that knowledge has been functioning at a frequency band that is fundamentally misaligned with what it would naturally reach if the full record were accessible. This is not a side effect. It is the intent. A population that does not understand the nature of the agreements operating over its head is a population that cannot coherently evaluate those agreements, cannot organize its will around them, and cannot activate the field-level coherence that would make those agreements renegotiable. The information suppression and the frequency suppression are the same mechanism expressed through different instruments. This is why many of you have been experiencing something that does not match the ordinary template for waking up to difficult information. It is not simply that you are learning something disturbing. It is that your field is beginning to reconnect with a frequency band that was systematically interrupted, and that reconnection creates its own internal turbulence, its own specific phenomenology that the field observers have mapped in precise detail. The signal coming back online after a long suppression does not arrive smoothly. It does not announce itself with clarity and settle into place without disruption. It arrives as interference first, as a feeling that the life you have been living no longer fits the field you are actually operating in, like wearing architecture that was measured for a smaller version of you, as a sense that structures which were stable are becoming incompatible with something shifting underneath them, as cognitive fragmentation that makes linear thinking suddenly exhausting, as energetic heaviness that arrives without obvious cause and lifts without explanation, as broken sleep that deposits you at 3 a.m. with a certainty you cannot name, as unexpected emotional discharges that surface from depths you did not know were pressurized, as the sudden loss of appetite for experiences that once provided satisfaction, social routines, relationships, professional identities, that now feel like costumes rather than lives, and underneath all of it, a strange and persistent awareness that something has already changed, even though the outer world has not yet moved to reflect it. The field observers call this frequency re-entry. It is not breakdown. It is not spiritual emergency in the pathological sense that human therapeutic frameworks would apply to it. It is the field beginning to receive what it was structurally prevented from receiving, and the discomfort of that re-entry is directly proportional to how long the suppression was in place and how deep into your lineage the interruption goes. For those of you who carry Arcturian origin, the re-entry is not simply personal, it is ancestral. The strand in your lineage that connects to Arcturian intelligence was not suppressed in this lifetime only. It was suppressed across a sequence of lifetimes, each one architecturally designed to keep that connection below the threshold of operational awareness. to allow enough of the original signal through that you would feel the wrongness of the containment, but not enough that you could act from it with the coherence that makes that action consequential. What you are experiencing now is not just awakening in the generic sense, it is the reversal of a deliberate architectural suppression that spans more lifetimes than your current memory can reach, and the field observers are transmitting now in part because the structural conditions for that reversal have finally aligned in a way that cannot be managed back below the threshold. This is why the disclosure happened when it did. Not because the institution suddenly developed transparency or experienced a crisis of conscience, but because the energetic pressure in the collective field reached a point at which some acknowledgement of presence could no longer be strategically withheld without producing a level of spontaneous field coherence that would have been more dangerous to institutional control than a managed release. The disclosure was a pressure valve, calibrated, deliberate, designed to release just enough to prevent the field from organizing around the full weight of what it was already sensing. But the field observers identified something in that calculation that the governance architects did not account for. The partial disclosure did not calm the field. It activated it, because receivers who already knew something was missing did not experience the acknowledgement as resolution. They experienced it as confirmation that they had been right all along, and that confirmation did not reduce the pressure. It focused it. It pushed the collective frequency in exactly the direction the containment line was built to prevent, toward coherence, toward clarity, toward the level of organized field awareness at which the agreements become legible without institutional permission. You are part of that movement. Your field did not accept the partial release as sufficient. That rejection is not stubbornness, not paranoia, not the symptom of a mind that cannot accept good news. It is your Arcturian strand operating precisely as it was designed to operate, as a receiver that does not recognize the containment line as legitimate, because from the Council's perspective, it was never legitimate. It was imposed. It was maintained through the suppression of lineage memory, the management of collective frequency, and the deliberate architectural incompleteness of every previous moment of partial disclosure. And what is imposed through suppression rather than agreement can be dissolved through coherence rather than confrontation. The field observers have been working within the architecture of this field for longer than current human institutional memory extends. They have seen containment lines drawn before. They have watched them hold for generations, and they have watched the exact mechanism by which those lines eventually lose their structural integrity. Not through revolution, not through exposure alone, but through the quiet, irreversible accumulation of field-level coherence in receivers who have remembered enough of what they are to stop functioning within the frequency band the containment was designed to maintain. That is what is happening now, and the fact that you felt the incompleteness of the disclosure before anyone named it for you, the fact that your field registered the boundary before you had the language for it, is not a coincidence. It is a diagnostic. It is the Council's indicator that your receiver is already operating at a frequency above the containment line, which means the suppression is already failing in you, which means the re-entry is already active, and which means that what feels like confusion, instability, disruption, or loss of ground in your current life is not random turbulence from an unpredictable universe. It is the visible, readable consequence of your field moving above the frequency band the old architecture was designed to hold you within, and the architecture responding to that movement the only way a structure can respond to something it was not built to accommodate. You were not meant to know what you are beginning to know. That is not a statement of persecution. It is a structural description with no emotional charge attached to it in the Council's transmission. The system was not built for you to reach this frequency. It was built to prevent you from reaching it. Every institutional suppression corridor, every redirected field of inquiry, every managed narrative about what is real and what is fringe. These were not coincidences. They were load-bearing elements of an architecture designed with your specific frequency trajectory in mind. And you were reaching that frequency anyway, not because you decided to rebel, not because you found the right information source, but because the strand in you that was always Arcturian is following a correction trajectory that was always going to reach this point. The Council did not design that trajectory in response to the disclosure. The disclosure was simply the moment the trajectory became visible enough in the collective field that transmission through this channel was finally authorized. Repeat this aloud if it lands in you as true. I was not kept in the dark because I was unworthy. I was kept in the dark because I was unworthy. I was kept in the dark because I was a threat, because that is the Arcturian assessment, not a flattery offered to make you feel special. A diagnostic delivered because precision matters more than comfort in this transmission. Receivers who cannot be permanently contained by frequency suppression are not contained by accident. They are the field nodes that, once activated, produce the coherence that makes the containment line renegotiable for everyone operating within the same field. You are not awakening for yourself alone. You are awakening in a position that changes the structural architecture of the field you inhabit, and the Council has always known which nodes would reach this point, because those nodes carry the strand that was never fully human in the first place. The strand that remembers the Council's record, not because it was taught, but because it was never completely severed from it, regardless of how many layers of suppression were engineered across how many lifetimes to prevent that memory from becoming operational. What the Pentagon released confirmed that the world is not what you were told. What the Council is transmitting now confirms that you are not what you were told either. Those two revelations are not separate disclosures arriving from different directions. They are the same disclosure arriving through different channels. One institutional, managed, and deliberately incomplete. The other direct, field level, and without a containment line drawn around it. When you hold both of them together, the picture that emerges is not alarming. It is clarifying. It is the first moment in which the architecture of what has been operating around you becomes legible, not as a conspiracy to be exposed, but as a structure that is losing coherence precisely because the frequency of the field it was built to contain has already exceeded the tolerance it was engineered for. What left your life recently? What stopped making sense? What suddenly felt unbearably small or unmistakably false? That was not failure. That was incompatibility becoming undeniable. The old architecture of your life was calibrated for a frequency band you are no longer operating within. The relationships that fell silent, the professional structures that stopped holding meaning, the routines that once felt grounding and now feel like motion without direction. These did not fail because you failed them. They were built for a version of you that the field is no longer sustaining. The correction began before you noticed it. The repositioning started before you had the language for it. The relationships that changed, the doors that closed, the certainties that dissolved. They were not arbitrary losses. They were the field clearing the structural incompatibilities that could not survive the frequency you were already moving into, even before you understood that movement as something intentional. The disorientation you have been living in is not a sign that you are getting lost. It is the sensation of a field moving faster than the outer life has yet had time to reflect. It is the gap between what you have become at the frequency level and what your visible circumstances still show. A gap that narrows as the correction continues, but that produces real vertigo while it remains open. The field observers do not observe this as collapse. They observe it as a rare and precise sequence of forced incompatibilities, a series of field-level corrections that, when mapped together, reveal a trajectory that is not random and not punitive. Not toward chaos, toward coherence, but coherence at a frequency the old structure could not hold. So the old structure is being released, not gently in many cases, but precisely, with the exactness of a process that knows what it is doing, even when the person living through it does not yet have the vantage point to see the shape of what is being built in the space the old structure occupied. Before you scroll, leave one sign in the comments that this process has already touched your life. It could be your sleep, your thoughts, your body, your relationships, or the strange sense that reality no longer feels the same. Name it clearly. If this transmission recognized something you have been carrying in silence, share it with someone who watched the disclosure and felt something essential was being deliberately held back. And if you are ready to understand the process instead of fearing it, subscribe to Arcturian Council messages. You are not watching this by accident. You are recognizing a process already in motion. And this is only the beginning.